Hello people and welcome to this new class in where we are gonna see the stroke panel. We will find it here, stroke, and once I click it, I will click and drag to isolate this panel here, and we can see many different options, right? First of all, we have to understand that we are talking about the stroke. And what is the stroke? When we are working with objects like geometries, shapes, or lines, these objects are vectors. A vector is defined by the stroke, the fill, and the effects. So, for example, this third shape, this square, right now, it just has a stroke, right? It doesn't have a fill, it doesn't have effects. Actually, we will forget about effects in this class. We are talking about, for example, the drop shadow, an inner glow, or something like this. The thing is that we can find this stroke in our main toolbar. We find here stroke and fill, and we can swap fill and stroke by clicking on this arrow. This stroke right now is in black color, right? And this switch is replicated up here in where we have as well the fill and the stroke, and we can expand the swatches panel in order to give them a specific color. We can do it with the fill, we can do it with the stroke. Furthermore, on the right side, we can change the thickness of that stroke. Right now, it is 7 points. But if I hover over this number and I either scroll up or scroll down, I will increase or decrease that thickness. I am scrolling down with my mouse and you can see how the stroke is getting thicker and thicker. Of course, I can use as well these up and down arrows. Just below here, in this another box, we can change the style line. Now the one chosen is solid, but again, we can scroll up or scroll down and then we will see the different lines applied on our stroke. All of these options and few more are included in the stroke panel. In fact, you can see how those changes are already registered in our stroke panel. The weight of the stroke is 50 points and the type of line is this one, right? So once we have this general view, let's go deeper into just this stroke panel. We know already what the weight means. Let's jump to this another feature called cup. If I select this ellipse, we can see how the weight changes, the type of line changes as well. A stroke now is none, we have just a fill. And if I zoom in and I increase the thickness of my stroke, you can see this kind of thread in the middle of the stroke, right? The relationship between the stroke and this thread is something that we can play with. So all of these features, cap, meter limit, join, align stroke, are playing with that relationship between the thread and the stroke. The diagrams are very clear in order to have in mind what is gonna happen. To be honest, they are not very important. I will just point out this one, round cap. Let's use it with a line because in a closed shape it doesn't make sense. So here we can make the end of the lines rounded thanks to this option. Anyways, I recommend you to spend a few minutes just practicing with all of them and check how they work accordingly with the little thumbnail. Anyways, much more important is the next option, the type of line and the boxes below. We saw already the type of line. Let's say, for example, we want this dashed line. Then we have the start and end. We can expand as well this menu. And then here we find something very handy and helpful. I'm talking about arrows. I can assure you that at some stages you will need to draw an arrow in your line. And here it is. First of all, we have to draw a line and then we have to define the start and the end of that line. And here, InDesign offers us different options. I will pick up this square solid as a start. And here it is. And then I move to the right side and I will pick up the circle option. Furthermore, I can swap a start and end arrowheads just by clicking on here. And these boxes below are changing the scale of those arrowheads. If I want that circle smaller, I will hold Shift key and I will use this down arrow to go till 50%. The same thing with the other side of the line. This time I will do it bigger. Finally, I can link start and end arrows scales by clicking on this chain. And then, if I modify any of these boxes, both arrowheads will change proportionally. What else we have? Down here we find the option called Align, in where we can extend arrow tip beyond end of the path, or we can place arrow tip at end of the path. Again, this is not very important. Let's do it with this another example. Check the diagrams. Now we have this second option on. If I click the one on the right side, there is a tiny difference. It is like our line becomes a little bit longer or shorter depending on the option we are using. This kind of things, to be honest, makes more sense when we are doing a digital illustration in Adobe Illustrator, and then we need to be very precise with this kind of paths to join them in a specific way and so on. In my experience, in InDesign, normally we don't have to use that. So next option, gap color. This gap color is talking about the color of the gaps when we are using a kind of line, like for example this dashed line. This line has gaps, and then we can define a color, let's say magenta. Here we are. Then thanks to the gap tint we can control the opacity of that color. Now it's 100%, but we can say, for example, 35%. Actually, it's not talking about the opacity, but the amount of tint. I mean, this is not transparent. And then when we are using this kind of line, more options pop up to adjust the corners, because imagine that we are using this kind of line with this kind of shape, type line dash, gap color, let's say this time cyan, gap tint, let's say 35%, and then here we can adjust the corners and say none, adjust dashes, and then we can see how the corners are perfectly adjusted, adjust gaps, or adjust dashes and gaps. At the same time, we can control the length of the dash and the length of the gap. Imagine that we want our dash to be longer, for instance 20 points. Here we are. And we want the gap shorter, for instance 5 points. And then this way we can control perfectly our line. Remember, you can modify many of these tools just by hover over the box and scroll with your mouse. The gap color, for instance, if I hover over this box and I scroll down and up, you can see how the color is changing in a very intuitive way, right? With the gap tint is not working, with the scale is not working, with the type line is working, with the start and end of the arrow is working. So I recommend you to explore this way of working because it is very fast and intuitive in order to find solutions visually. So we reached the end of this class. I hope that you have enjoyed, and I will see you in the next episode.